with Boris Johnson and his, well, there's so many crimes you couldn't throw a stick at them, could you? But to be fair, but let's start off with some of his crimes that 44% of the people were elected in 2019.
Yeah, I mean, these are we're not just doing some left-wing Tory bashing thing here by calling them crimes. We are specifically saying here that Boris Johnson has committed 4 actual crimes. He's probably broken the law more, far more than that. But we're highlighting 4 specific crimes that he's committed. The first one being arson, the crime of arson. So this goes back to his days at Eton when he was a member of the infamous Bullingdon Club, this club of exceptionally wealthy people who met regularly. They'd have a weekly dinner and generally smash up the places where they met for dinner, whether it was posh people's homes, their own family places, the restaurants they went to, etc. It was just an accepted thing that they would that they'd smash it up, cause tens of thousands of pounds of damage, and they'd turn up with vast wads of cash and pay off the owner, the restaurant owner or whatever, give them thousands of pounds for the repairs afterwards. And there's lots and lots of records of them doing this. This is back in the time that both David Cameron and Boris Johnson were members of the Bullingdon Club. And apart from just sort of flaunting their wealth and wanton vandalism and destruction, they also were renowned for being exceptionally sexist and demeaning towards women. One of the people that was in the Bullingdon Club at the time of Johnson and Cameron described having, to use his word, whores, i.e., prostitutes, sex workers. So his words were whores and prostitutes would be hired and used. And not only used for sexual purposes, but thoroughly demeaned. So they'd be made to get on all fours and struck with whips, just for their upper class twit amusement. So all of this is very, has been documented by actually several members of the Bullingdon Club over the years that have described this, and described, the burning of £50 notes in front of homeless people, which was a sort of ritual for people joining the club.
I just interrupt as well there, Tom. You talk about Boris Johnson, obviously, and David Cameron and his other Bullingdon Club members demeaning women. There's actually a very interesting story about Donald Trump when he stayed, I think it was in a hotel in Venice, and it was in the room, I'm not sure if it's Venice, I might have got that wrong, but excuse me, he was in the room where previously the Obamas had stayed. And the story goes that he hired prostitutes and got them to go onto all fours on the bed in which the Obamas had slept, and then told them to urinate over the bed. And it's an interesting thing that these rich, extremely rich men in positions of power who are either psychopathic or sociopathic, we know that the research and the testing has been done, behave in such an extremely disgusting way, and that misogyny. We talked a lot about racism, we've talked a lot about the homophobia, but the misogyny that comes from these types of people as well is extremely scary. And you wonder why, women, for example, would ever vote for these people, knowing how foul and disgusting they are.
Absolutely. I mean, it beggars belief that any woman would want to vote for Trump or Johnson. That incident you're talking about was in Moscow.
Oh, Moscow, and sorry, you're absolutely right. Yes,
to have been in Moscow, and it was certainly the most controversial element of the famous Steele dossier compiled by British spy surnamed Steele. I've forgotten his first name. Who put together a dossier which was originally ordered by the Republicans when they thought Trump was, that people wanted to stop him standing, or succeeding in the nomination battle for nomination to be the Republican candidate for president. So the Republicans, initiated the putting together of this dossier about Trump. They then sort of dropped it when he became the nominee, and the Democrats took it forward. Anyway, so this MI6 British spy person Steele put this dossier together. The most controversial bit of it was certainly this notion that this incident happened and that there was a tape of it, that the Russians and Putin perhaps have a tape, because of course, Donald Trump stays in a hotel in Moscow. There's going to be hidden cameras, there's going to be recordings of it. And Steele reckoned that there was very likely to be tapes held by Putin of Trump having these, golden shower events with sex workers in Moscow. I'm not even sure that he paid for them. I think they were provided, was the thing. Anyway, back to
Boris Johnson, yes, yeah.
Yes, back to Boris. So the first crime we're accusing him of is arson, and that's because amongst the various details of Bullingdon Club exploits, it was actually David Cameron himself back in, I think it was 1986, yes, stated that when recounting one of the times that they smashed up a restaurant, that he said something along the lines of, "We smashed up the restaurant and Boris set fire to the toilets." So David Cameron stated very clearly that Boris committed the offence of arson. That's number one. Moving on to number two, and this is about as clear a case of this as you could possibly imagine. Certainly a most consequential case of this, and it's the crime of incitement to racial hatred, which is, part of the race relations laws that we have. So Boris Johnson,
he's guilty of hate crime, isn't he? He's guilty of hate crime.
Yeah, it's hate crime. I mean, there's been numerous ways in which you could say that Boris Johnson has incited racial hatred. Almost countless ways. From writing a book that was very racist. I won't even repeat some of the things in it, but horrifically racist things in this novel that he wrote. All sorts of comments. People know about the comments he's made about black people in Africa being pickaninnies and so on and so forth. But very specifically, he infamously wrote this Telegraph column in which he described Muslim women wearing the niqab as looking like bank robbers or letterboxes. It later transpired that Steve Bannon, Trump's advisor and very right-wing white supremacist chap that used to run Breitbart right-wing news channel in America, he was advising Johnson over the weekend, over the period of time that Johnson was actually writing that column. Bannon was in regular contact with him. He bragged about it on a documentary. And Bannon, obviously, as he did with Trump, no doubt said to Johnson, yeah, you want to be popular and get votes. This is before Johnson became Prime Minister. Say something outrageously Islamophobic and you'll get all the right-wing people, all the Daily Mail and Sun readers, all the racists, all the far right, and some misguided pensioners. You'll get them all supporting you, forever if you say something horrifically Islamophobic. And so Johnson did, and he wrote this disgusting comment in his column. In the weeks that followed the publication of that column, hate crime against Muslim women in this country rose by 375%. And many victims described the fact that their assailants quoted Boris Johnson or named Boris Johnson as they carried out the attacks, some of which were attacks of physical violence. You cannot get a more sort of example of the crime of incitement to racial hatred, because it had consequences. It wasn't just words; it was words that led to consequences of violent hate crime against Muslim women. So he's absolutely guilty of incitement to racial hatred. The third one is conspiracy to commit a violent act. And this again is a well-documented event where Boris Johnson was contacted by one of his old Eton cronies, Darius Guppy, old posh Eton friend, who was having a beef with a journalist in that a journalist was investigating him over something quite legitimately, and he decided he wanted to have the journalist beaten up to sort of warn him off. And he believed that Johnson had the journalist number, which he did, or his address, which he did, Johnson did. And so he phoned Johnson and asked him for the address of the journalist so that he can send someone to beat the journalist up. And there's a recorded phone call, which is made public. Anyone that hasn't heard it, go online and type in.
It's on Dorset Eye.
It's on Dorset Eye. Okay, so you can find it on Dorset Eye. Use the search button and find it on Dorset Eye. And so it's a recorded phone conversation between Guppy and Johnson where they're discussing how badly the guy's going to get beaten up. Johnson was willing and agreed to pass the address to Guppy. Just was concerned that the guy wouldn't be beaten up too badly, and particularly concerned that it wouldn't come back on him, that he wouldn't maybe be arrested for conspiracy to commit violence, which obviously he should have been arrested for and charged for. So that's very clear. And the very good, excellent journalist Eddie Mair once interviewed Johnson on TV. Again, this is on Dorset Eye, and challenged him over it and said to Johnson, "You're a nasty piece of work, aren't you?" Because he is. So that's the third crime he's very clearly committed. And the fourth one is that we're calling him out for is the crime of social murder. That's not a term used in law. In law, it's just mass murder. Actually, it's sort of genocide, mass murder. For someone in his position, it's probably failure to protect the public. So, but in sociological terms, there's this term social murder, and that's because throughout the pandemic, Johnson has very clearly, despite what he says, despite the lies and the alternative truth he tries to spin, he has not followed the advice of the scientists. The scientists are actually regularly saying that the advice they're giving is to do one thing, and Johnson has been doing the opposite. And that has obviously led to, throughout the pandemic, he has put profits and the economy, which basically means profits for the very few, the rich people that he's friends with and that support him and that donate money to the Conservative Party. He's put those profits above the lives of people, and hence we have one of the worst pandemic responses in the world, both in terms of death rates and in terms of the recovery of our economy, one of the worst in the world. And of course, we have officially 130,000 dead. We know it's more than that. It's probably a little over 150,000 that have died directly from COVID.
To be more specific on this, Tom, I think we need to nail it down a bit so that in law there is an issue, because I know that there are families surrounding those people who died in care homes who are seriously considering taking out prosecutions against the government, Matt Hancock and Boris Johnson more specifically. And this whole idea that they were ring-fenced and they were also given the correct PPE and all that, which is now transpires to be utter and total rubbish. So I think there is a campaign at the moment for a lot of people who, as I said, suffered as a result of the care home debacle, who are uniting in order to find maybe how there is a way to do a proper legal challenge and maybe to hold, I say, certain individuals to account, which we'll watch with interest. But I think when we talk about the term social murder, we have to nail things down very, very specifically, because every country in the world has suffered deaths, and every country in the world have governments who have made mistakes, and it doesn't matter who you have in those positions of power and responsibility. we all make mistakes. It's the reason why we make those mistakes. And I think in Boris Johnson's case, he's perceived as being a libertarian, which means that he wants to ensure that rules and regulations and laws are kept out of many equations so that people can be, as individuals, free to behave in the way in which they would like to behave. I think the problem is that when you live in a hierarchical, what we call civilized society, the nature of that and libertarianism clash massively. If you took away all the rules, all the laws, we had anarchy, libertarianism would fit like a velvet glove. But it doesn't fit like a velvet glove when governments, year after year, generation after generation, are about control, about imposing their authority, because that is anti-libertarian. So to have a libertarian prime minister come onto the scene at time of a massive pandemic and to utilize at least some of that ideology has led to the outcomes that we have. So it wasn't a pragmatic response, it was an ideological response in many cases, although not entirely. So I think this nailing it down a little bit, because I do think is very clear room for a legal process to be involved at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, we all know the lies have been exposed now. The lies, like, you know, we threw our protective ring around care homes. That's been exposed as one of the most egregious lies of the last 18 months, probably the most egregious and absolutely clear lie. You know, they absolutely knew that was an utter lie when they said it. So anyway, yeah, we don't need to go into more detail on that, but yeah, those 4 crimes anyway are all put together in a nice article on Dorset Eye with some wanted posters. So yeah, I hope people will check out the article as well as this.
Yeah,
so that's Johnson.
Yeah, that's